That is my son's wife's seat. Get up!
Preston said...
I don't care what Preston said.
The first thing Caroline heard was laughter. Not her laughter, someone else's. It floated through the open doors of the Whitfield dining room like perfume that didn't belong to her. Light, practiced, the kind of laugh that knows exactly how it sounds. Caroline stood in the doorway. She was 8 months pregnant. Her feet ached in the specific way they had ached every evening for 6 weeks. Her back was a low, continuous fire that had become so familiar she barely noticed it anymore. Her pale gold silk dress, the one she'd spent 40 minutes choosing, pulled across her belly in a way that was elegant and exhausting at the same time. She stood in the doorway of the Whitfield dining room, and she looked for her chair. The Whitfield estate sat on 14 acres outside of Savannah. The main house had 11 rooms. The formal dining room held the longest table Caroline had ever seen in a private home. 32 chairs, dark mahogany. The table had been in the family for 4 generations, and one chair was different from the others. Not in wood, not in upholstery, but in position, in meaning. The chair at the patriarch's left hand. 12 years ago, before Caroline had ever set foot in this house, Vivian Whitfield had declared that seat belonged to the wife. Not by sentiment, by structure. By the kind of rule that doesn't get written down because it doesn't need to be. Everyone simply knew. For 3 years, that chair had been Caroline's. She looked at it now. A woman was sitting in it, dark hair, red dress, beautiful in the way that costs money and reads as effortless. She was laughing at something Preston had said. Her hand rested on the white tablecloth, close to his. Not touching, but close. 31 people were in that room. Not one of them had looked up when Caroline walked in. She stood in the doorway in pale gold silk, 8 months of their daughter growing inside her. The orchids she had ordered white 40 stems, 5 crystal vases gleamed down the center of the table. She had ordered those orchids herself. No one looked up. Caroline, a voice at her elbow, Margaret Whitfield, Preston's mother. She had a talent for appearing at elbows. "You look lovely, sweetheart. There's a wonderful seat near the far end." Near the far end. "There's a woman in my chair," Caroline said. She kept her voice low. She was very good at low. Margaret smiled. She was excellent at smiling. "Danielle is an associate of Preston's, client relations. Very important tonight. You understand?" I understand nothing, Caroline thought. But she said nothing, because she was 8 months pregnant, standing in a doorway. 31 people talking around her like furniture. Her feet were swelling inside her shoes. Her back was on fire, and she was so tired. She had been so tired for so long. She took one step toward the far end of the table. Then it happened. A voice. Not loud, not raised, but carrying, the way voices carry when they have never, in a long life, needed to shout to be heard. "Preston." The conversations dimmed. Not immediately, in waves. The way things quiet when something more important enters the room. Vivian Whitfield sat at the head of the table, 81 years old in her face, 60 in the set of her spine. She wore black, as she always wore at anniversary dinners since the year her husband died, a single pearl brooch at her collar. Her hands folded on the table in front of her. She said it again. "Preston." Preston looked up. He had not looked up when Caroline walked in. He looked up now, because everyone looked up when Vivian spoke in that particular register. His expression started to rearrange itself. Toward concern, toward the performance of noticing. He didn't get there, because Vivian was already standing. Slowly, with total authority, with the deliberate pace of a woman who has never once needed to hurry to be taken seriously. She pointed, one finger, directly at the woman in the mahogany chair, and she said it loud enough for every person in that room to hear it clearly. "Get up." The room held its breath. The woman Danielle went very still, then very red. Then she stood. She stood and said nothing. Because there was nothing to say, she moved 3 chairs down. She sat. The chair was empty. Everyone was looking at Caroline. She walked to her chair, her actual chair. At Preston's left, she sat down. She placed her napkin across her lap. She looked straight ahead, and her hands beneath the table were shaking. Because that moment before the shout, that silence where 31 people saw her standing, saw her swollen feet and her 8 months of pregnancy and her pale gold dress, and not one of them moved. That was the moment she understood something. Something she had been refusing to understand for a very long time. She picked up her water glass. God, when did I become invisible, she thought. Right here at this table. Right here in this room I decorated. I've been invisible here for years. I just now saw it. She took a slow sip. The dinner continued around her like she was part of the wallpaper. She smiled when spoken to. She answered questions. She performed Caroline Whitfield, which she had become very skilled at. The gracious wife, the appropriate presence. The woman who made everything run and stood in doorways while no one looked up. But her mind was somewhere else. Her mind was still in that doorway. She looked down the long table at Preston. He was talking, laughing again. The candlelight made everything golden and warm. He looked like a man without a single thing to explain. She looked at the woman 3 chairs down, Danielle, who had worn red to a Whitfield anniversary dinner, who had sat in her chair like she had a right to it. Maybe she thought she did. The thought arrived like cold water poured down the back of a dress. Maybe she thinks she belongs here more than I do. The soup arrived, white bean and rosemary. Caroline had chosen the menu. She ate. She had chosen the menu. She had ordered the orchids. She had confirmed the florist 3 times. She had overseen the table settings and the seating chart and the flower arrangements in the foyer. She had made this beautiful, and she had almost stood in the doorway of it until she disappeared. Margaret was watching her from across the table, not unkindly, but watchfully, the way you watch something you're waiting to see crack. Caroline looked back at her. I'm not cracking, she thought. Not tonight. But her hands were still shaking under the table. After dinner in the drawing room, Vivian appeared at her side. The old woman said nothing for a moment. She looked at the room the way she always looked at it, like an architect reviewing something she still owns. She has been coming to his office for 7 months, Vivian said. I am sorry I did not say something sooner. Caroline absorbed this. 7 months. The baby was 8 months along. The math was very simple and very ugly. Thank you for tonight, Caroline said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. The seat at his left is yours, Vivian said. Don't forget that, even if he does. Then she moved away. Caroline stood alone near the tall window. She looked at the garden lit with the landscape lights she had chosen. She thought, 7 months. She thought he let her sit in my chair. She thought he didn't look up when I walked in. And then very quietly, in the room of her own mind where she had been storing things, this is not the first time I have been invisible. This is just the first time I saw it clearly. She finished her water. She drove herself home. She sat in the parked car for 11 minutes. She knew it was 11 minutes because she watched the clock on the dashboard without meaning to. 10:57 when she turned off the engine. 11:08 when she finally opened the door. 11 minutes of sitting in her own driveway. Unable to go inside, the house was lit, golden and large against the dark sky. Beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they cost a great deal of money. And someone with good taste has arranged them carefully. She had good taste. She had arranged everything carefully. She got out of the car. The kitchen was pristine. The housekeeper had gone for the night. Caroline stood at the island and opened the refrigerator and looked into it without seeing anything. Then she closed it. She went upstairs. She brushed her teeth. She changed out of the gold silk dress. She would not wear it again. She already knew that. The way you know certain things immediately and completely. She sat on the edge of the bed. Preston's side was smooth. He wouldn't be home for an hour at least. She picked up her phone. She put it down. She picked it up again. Lock. Unlock. Lock. She set it face down on the nightstand. She opened her laptop instead. Not his phone, not his email. Just the household accounts. She had full access because Preston had always been generous with that. Generous with money. Had never made her feel controlled by it. She understood now that the generosity might have been its own kind of distraction. She scrolled through the accounts. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. She found it 6 minutes later. A hotel. The Palmetto House, downtown Savannah, $41,000 in charges spread across 14 months. She stared at the number. She had been to the Palmetto House once, a charity luncheon. The concierge had mentioned the top-floor suite, $2,000 a night, $41,000, 14 months. She did the math. More than 20 nights, over more than a year. She looked at the dates. 3 were during his trips to Atlanta for development meetings. She had packed his suitcase for 2 of those trips. She had texted him restaurant recommendations. 3 were during the week she spent in Charleston after her father's knee surgery. Preston had said he would be in back-to-back meetings all week. He had called her every evening. He had sounded tired. 2 were weekends she'd spent in bed with headaches. The headaches had been real. She had not manufactured them. Preston had said he was working. He had been working. She closed the laptop. She sat for a long time. Then she opened it again. His calendar. She had access for scheduling purposes, for planning the events and travel and dinners that made the life of a Whitfield function. She went back 14 months, 22 evenings marked private. She had never looked at those before. They hadn't existed in the first year of their marriage. They had started appearing around month 8 of her pregnancy. No. She scrolled further back. They had started 17 months ago, 2 months before she got pregnant. Something moved in her chest. Not breaking, something colder than breaking, something that had been suspended in ice for a long time and was now slowly becoming water. God, I was so stupid, she thought. The signs were all there, every single one. I kept choosing not to see them. She went to the bathroom. She sat on the cold tile floor. The baby moved. A slow roll, then a push against her lower ribs. I see it now, Caroline said quietly. To Alice. To the daughter who had no name yet but who was already making her presence known. I see it. She sat on the bathroom floor for a long time. Not crying. Just breathing. Just letting the new information find its shape. The way water finds the shape of whatever it's poured into. She thought about the signed card from the florist. The scent on it that wasn't a floral house smell. She had noticed. She had filed it away. She thought about the text message she'd glimpsed on his phone 6 months ago, face up on the counter while she carried groceries in from the car. She had not read it. She had told herself it was work. She thought about her friend Petra, who 8 months ago had said, "You need to ask Preston about the Palmetto house." And Caroline had said they'd been there for events. And Petra had looked at her with that particular expression that is kindness wrapped around a warning. And Caroline had changed the subject. Petra had never brought it up again. Caroline had never asked. She sat on the tile floor and felt for the first time the full weight of how much energy she had spent not asking. Not asking about the trips, the hours, the Sunday calls he took in another room. Not asking because asking meant knowing. And knowing meant the life she had built and tended and hosted and made beautiful was not what she had thought she was building. She stood up from the bathroom floor. This took some effort at 8 months. She pressed one hand to the wall and pushed herself upright. She washed her face. She dried it. She looked at herself in the mirror. I'm not crazy, she thought. I know what I saw tonight. I know what I found just now. I know what I have been refusing to know for a very long time. I am not imagining this. I never was. She went back to bed. She lay on her side, the only position that didn't hurt anymore, and stared at the wall. She heard Preston come in at 11:43. She heard his footsteps on the stairs, the door opening. She closed her eyes and made her breathing slow and even. She felt him stand at the foot of the bed for a moment, looking at her. Then he went to his dressing room. She lay in the dark. She breathed slowly. She made a list. In her head, in the precise, organized way she had always made lists. Ordered. Thorough. Without sentiment. She thought about Vivian's voice cutting through that room. Get up. 2 words that had rearranged everything. She thought about $41,000 in 22 evenings marked private, and the math that was very simple and very ugly. She thought about her daughter. She thought, a mother who isn't afraid. That's what you need. That's what I'm going to build. By the time gray morning began at the edges of the curtains, she had made one decision. She was going to stop not knowing. All of it. Everything. She called Ruthann at 7 in the morning. Ruthann picked up on the second ring. Tell me, Ruthann said. She had already been awake. She always knew when something had happened. There is a frequency certain friends share that operates without words. So Caroline told her. She told her about the doorway, about Danielle in the red dress, about the silence that had lasted too long, about Vivian's voice. She told her about the $41,000 and the 22 calendar entries and the way Preston had stood at the foot of the bed in the dark and watched her pretend to be asleep. Ruthann listened without interrupting. This was harder for her than it looked. Caroline knew that. When Caroline finished, there was a silence. Then Ruthann said, Honey, I've been biting my tongue for a year. Do you want the tongue unbitten? Yes, Caroline said. Company Christmas party last January. You had a cold. You didn't go. I went with Marcus. There was a woman there. Dark hair. Red adjacent. She has a type, apparently. She was with Preston most of the night. Not in a way that announced itself. In a way that whispered. Ruthann paused. I didn't know what I was looking at. Then I thought I did. Then I convinced myself I was wrong. You should have told me. I know. I'm sorry. I was afraid you'd shoot the messenger and lose me. I wouldn't have. I didn't know that for certain. A pause. What are you going to do? Caroline looked out the kitchen window. The morning garden was green. Very green. She had planted 2 of those rose bushes herself. Her knees had ached afterward and she had felt satisfied in the specific way that physical work produces. I'm going to find out what I'm dealing with, she said. All of it. Not just the affair, the money, the assets, the legal structure of this marriage. You need an attorney, Ruthann said. I need Owen first, Caroline said. Owen Grayson. Ruthann was quiet. He's the Whitfield family attorney, Caroline, I know. But he's also a decent man. I need to understand where I stand before I decide anything. She made breakfast after she hung up. Eggs, slow-cooked the way her grandmother had taught her. Low heat, patience, a little butter at the end. She ate standing at the counter because the kitchen stool was the right height for her back these days, and the chair at the table no longer felt comfortable. She thought about her grandmother, Alice Merritt, for whom she intended to name her daughter, a woman who had lived in a small house in Augusta and grown tomatoes and kept a jar of old buttons on the windowsill because she said things that were still useful should never be thrown away. Her grandmother had told her once, "You'll always know when something is true. The body knows first. The mind just takes longer to catch up." Her body had known. For a long time. She heard Preston on the stairs at 8:15. He came into the kitchen showered, dressed, moving with the particular efficiency of a man who has somewhere to be that he does not intend to announce. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. He poured coffee, he checked his phone, he did not ask how she had slept. She had been watching for that. Just to see. He didn't ask. "Full day," he said. "Anderson deal is closing. I'll probably be late." "All right," she said. He looked at her then. A particular kind of look, an assessment, a checking. The kind of look that searches for signs of what you know. She looked back at him. Steady. Eating her eggs. Whatever he was checking for, he didn't find it. "You okay?" he said. "Fine," she said, tired. "The baby was active last night." He nodded. He kissed the top of her head. She had once leaned into that gesture. Now it felt like a signature he'd stopped meaning. Like signing a form without reading it, he left. She listened to his car on the gravel. Then she called her mother. Carol Ann Merritt answered on the first ring. "Bug," she said. The name she had called Caroline since infancy. Ladybug, shortened. Caroline thought about how to answer. "Mom," she said, "how did you know?" "When Dad left." "How did you know when to stop trying?" A pause. A thinking pause. Not uncomfortable. "I knew," Carol Ann said finally, "when I realized I was more afraid of staying than of leaving. When the fear flipped directions. That was when I knew." Caroline sat with that. "Is it flipping?" her mother asked. "I don't know yet," Caroline said. "But I'm looking at everything directly. For the first time." "Then you're already ahead of where I was," Caroline said. "I refused to look for 2 years." "I need you to come," Caroline said. "Can you come?" "I'll explain everything when you get here." "I'm already looking for my suitcase," Carol Ann said. "I'll be there by 2. After she hung up, she sat quietly for 10 minutes. She thought about the dinner, about the chair, about 31 people having conversations while she stood in the doorway in pale gold silk. She thought about the orchids she'd ordered. She had made that evening beautiful. She had made every evening beautiful. She had been very good at making things beautiful for other people. She opened a new contact in her phone. Owen Grayson. She sent a text. "Owen, this is Caroline Whitfield. I'd like to meet privately. Today, if possible. It's important." The reply came in 4 minutes. 2 o'clock. "My office. I'll clear the hour." She put the phone down. She thought about her grandmother's jar of old buttons on the windowsill. Things that are still useful should never be thrown away. She thought, "I have been useful my entire life. I just forgot that the most important use is for myself." Carol Ann arrived at 1:50 with a rolling suitcase and a pecan pie still warm from a bakery she'd stopped at on the drive. She said nothing when she hugged her daughter. Just held on, the way mothers hold on when they understand that words would be less than the holding. Then she pulled back and looked at Caroline's face. "You look tired," she said. "I am. But not broken." "No." Carol Ann nodded once. Satisfied. "Good. I'll put this pie down and you tell me everything," so Caroline told her. Again. All of it. Carol Ann listened at the kitchen counter. She made tea while she listened. She did not say "I told you so," which she had earned the right to say, and never once said in 3 years of having careful, restrained opinions about Preston Whitfield. When Caroline finished, Carol Ann poured 2 cups and pushed one across the counter. "When do you see Owen?" she asked. "In 10 minutes, Caroline said. "I'm driving myself." "No," Carol Ann said, "I'll drive. You're 8 months pregnant and you're processing something significant. I'll drive." Caroline didn't argue. In the car, her mother said, "What are you most afraid of?" Caroline thought about it honestly. "That I'll have the baby and still be in this," she said. "That I'll be holding Alice and still be invisible. That I'll have gone through all of this and still not have chosen myself." Carol Ann kept her eyes on the road. "You have never," she said, "once you decided something, failed to follow through. Not once in your life. You are the most decided person I know. I decided on Preston." "You decided on a version of Preston he showed you," her mother said. "That's different from deciding on who he actually was." She glanced over. "What are you deciding now?" "I'm gathering information first," Caroline said. "Then I'll decide." "That's smart," Carol Ann said. Ruth Ann thought so too. Ruth Ann is smart. The city moved past the windows. The Spanish moss on the live oaks. The wide streets and old storefronts and the particular light of Savannah in the morning that made everything look like it had been here forever and was not going anywhere. She had loved this city from the first day she came here. She still loved it. That was not his. Owen Grayson's office smelled of old paper and considered decisions. He had been practicing law for 30 years. He had the kind of face that absorbs information without reacting to it, which was either deeply professional or deeply sad, depending on the information. He stood when Caroline and Carol Ann came in. He shook both their hands. He did not express surprise at Carol Ann's presence, which meant Vivian had probably already called him, which meant Vivian was working a strategy that Caroline was only beginning to understand. "Sit down," he said. "Tell me what you know. Then I'll tell you what I know. Then we'll figure out where you stand." She sat. She told him everything. He listened with a yellow legal pad and a pen. He made occasional marks. When she finished, he looked at his notes for a moment. "The prenuptial agreement," he said. "You signed it 3 years ago." "I know." "Do you know what's in it?" She had read it once. 3 years ago, with a young associate from Preston's firm. Pleasant. Thorough. She had trusted him because Preston trusted him. "I know what I was told was in it," she said. Owen nodded slowly. "There are 2 clauses relevant to your situation." He turned the legal pad toward her. She read. "The first clause, in the event of documented infidelity by either party, the injured spouse is entitled to 40% of marital assets, not the standard 20. The second clause, any child born during the marriage defaults in custody preference to the primary caregiver in contested cases, the mother until the child turns 18. She read both clauses twice. She looked up. "Preston helped draft a version of this agreement 12 years ago," Owen said carefully. "For a different situation. He may have forgotten the specific language, or he may be betting that you don't know it exists." "He's betting I don't know," Caroline said. Owen said nothing, which was confirmation. 40%, she said, of marital assets. The Whitfield marital estate assets acquired during your marriage is currently valued at approximately $180 million. The number was very large and very clear. She heard her mother beside her take a quiet breath. "If I can document the infidelity," Caroline said. "There is already documentation," Owen said, carefully, "in the form of the hotel charges on the marital account. There is also a pattern that has been noted by staff at several Whitfield properties over the past 14 months. He paused. "I am not able to volunteer specifics without a formal retainer. What I can tell you is that documentation exists." "I want to retain you," Caroline said. "I represent the Whitfield family," Owen said. "That constitutes a conflict of interest. I cannot take you as a client. Can you refer me to someone?" He wrote 3 names on a separate piece of paper. He slid it across the desk. "These are the 3 best family law attorneys in Georgia," he said. "I would call any one of them if someone I cared about needed help." He looked at her steadily. "Caroline." He had never called her by her first name before. It felt deliberate. "Vivian Whitfield called me this morning. She asked me to make sure you understood your options." He glanced at the legal pad. "You have significant options. What you do with them is entirely your decision." She looked at the 3 names on the paper. She thought about Preston's face that morning. That checking look. She thought about Danielle in the red dress. She thought about 22 evenings marked private. About $41,000. About the math that was simple and ugly. She thought about Alice. Starting over feels impossible, she thought. But staying feels worse. Starting over feels impossible, but staying feels worse. "Can you call these 3 attorneys?" she said, "and give them context? So I don't start from the beginning every time?" "I can do that," Owen said. "Then yes, please." Please. They stood. He shook her hand with both of his. Behind the professional face, she could see just for a moment the man who had sent her a personal note when she graduated. The man who had wept at a Whitfield funeral. "You are going to be all right," he said. "It was not a legal opinion." She thanked him. In the car her mother drove, and Caroline looked out the window. The waterfront. The bridges. The river moving the way it always moved, steady and indifferent and beautiful. "How do you feel?" her mother asked. "Like I've been underwater," Caroline said, "and I just came up." "Good." "Also terrified. That's appropriate." $180 million, Caroline said. "I heard. I didn't marry him for money." "I know that," Carol Ann said. "But you were married for 3 years. Alice deserves everything that entitles her to. Don't confuse your integrity with punishing yourself." Caroline looked at her mother. She thought, "How did I spend 3 years forgetting what this woman taught me?" "I need to tell Preston," she said. "Before I file anything. I need to sit across from him and say it directly." "Why?" She thought about it. "Because I want to know if there's anything real left," she said. "Any honest thing, before I close the door." Carol Ann was quiet. "When?" she said. "Tonight," Caroline said, "after dinner." After you take the soup and go to Ruth Ann's, you want to do it alone? Yes. Her mother drove in silence. The city moved past. All right, Carol Ann said, but you call me the minute you're done, I will. And know what you want before you go in. Don't let him define the conversation. She was already thinking about what she wanted. She was very clear. She had decided. She had been deciding since the moment Vivian pointed at Danielle's chair and said, "Get up." Maybe she had been deciding since before that. Maybe the decision had been building for a long time and she had just refused to look at it directly until the night she stood in a doorway and no one looked up. She made soup that afternoon, her grandmother's recipe. The one that started with roasting the bones first, which took 4 hours and made the house smell like something was being rebuilt from the inside out. Carol Ann moved around the kitchen with the efficiency of a woman who has been feeding people through crises for 30 years. Caroline sat on the kitchen stool and directed. Her feet needed to be up. The baby was quiet in the afternoon way she had restless at dawn, still by 2 o'clock, relentless by midnight. She talked while the bones roasted. She told her mother things she hadn't told Owen. The smaller things. The ones that didn't constitute legal evidence but constituted the truth of 3 years. The way Preston had stopped asking about her research. Not suddenly. Gradually. The way water recedes from a shore slowly enough that you don't notice until you look back and realize how far it's gone. The way dinner conversations had shifted. Not about her work, her thoughts, her ideas. About his deals, his family, his decisions that she was consulted on but not equal to. The signed card from the florist with the wrong perfume. The Sunday calls he took in the garden. The way he'd stopped reaching for her hand in public around 14 months ago. She had noticed each of these things. She had filed them away. She had told herself, this is what long marriage looks like. This is comfort. This is settling. This is normal. She had been so convinced that disappearing slowly was normal that she had helped with the process. Somewhere along the way, I became invisible, she thought. Not because anyone erased me. Because I helped. I thought love required it. You stopped writing, Carol Ann said. Caroline looked up. Your essays, her mother said. Your research. You were almost finished with your thesis when you got married. You never went back to it. I had the house. The dinners. I know what you had, Carol Ann said. I also know what you stopped having. The soup was beginning to smell like something worth waiting for. Caroline pressed her hand against her belly. I want to name her Alice, she said. After Grandma. Carol Ann went still for a moment. Then she kept stirring. She would have liked that, she said quietly. She was strong, Caroline said. Decided. I want that for her. Alice is a strong name, Carol Ann said. They were quiet then. The kitchen held the particular peace that cooking together creates. Something about the shared purpose. Something about the smell of patience becoming something nourishing. Preston came home at 9:45. He scanned the kitchen and registered Carol Ann with the composure of a man managing a surprise. Carol Ann, he said, I didn't realize you were visiting. I didn't realize I needed to announce myself, Carol Ann said pleasantly. Preston smiled. He was very good at smiling. Of course. Always welcome. He kissed Caroline's cheek. How was your day, sweetheart? Quiet, she said. Restful. He made himself a drink. He asked Carol Ann about the drive from Macon. He was charming. He had always been charming. Caroline watched him. She had spent 3 years believing his charm was for her. She understood now it was simply for whoever needed managing. She excused herself at 10 and went upstairs. She sat at her writing desk in the corner of the bedroom, the corner that had always been hers. She opened a notebook, a real paper one, the kind she'd used in graduate school, and she wrote numbers, properties, account names, asset structures she remembered from documents she'd seen in passing over 3 years. Things she hadn't thought she was paying attention to. She had been paying attention. She just hadn't been using it. She wrote for an hour. When she heard Preston's steps on the stairs, she closed the notebook. She put it in the top drawer. She was in bed, open book on her chest, when he came in. He looked at her. That checking expression. It's nice your mother is here, he said. Yes, she said. Is everything okay? She looked up from the book. Of course, she said. Just tired. You know how it is at 8 months. He nodded. He went to the bathroom. She listened to the routine sounds of him preparing for bed and thought about how well she knew these sounds. How completely she had organized her life around the rhythms of another person. How she had confused familiarity with home. He came to bed. He said goodnight. She said goodnight. She stared at the ceiling. The hardest part, she thought, isn't what he did. The hardest part is what I did to myself. The permission I gave. The pieces I surrendered one at a time. That's what I have to face. That's what I have to forgive. The room was dark and quiet. Preston's breathing evened out into sleep. She lay awake. She thought about Ruth Ann's face when she'd told her. the held breath before speaking, the tongue she'd been biting for a year. She thought about Petra's warning 8 months ago. That kind, careful look. The subject change Caroline had made so smoothly. She thought about the notebook in the top drawer. I have been paying attention, she thought. I have always been paying attention. I just kept the information in a room I refused to enter. She was entering it now. She called the first name on Owen's list at 7 the next morning. Harriet Foss. The phone was answered on the third ring by Harriet herself. Not an assistant. Harriet. Who said Caroline Whitfield? Owen called yesterday. I've been expecting to hear from you. Can you come in this morning at 10? She could. Harriet Foss's office was in a building on Abercorn Street that was older than anything the Whitfields had built. Her office had floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a desk the size of a dining table and reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. She was 61 years old. She had the energy of someone who decided early that the work was the point and the recognition would sort itself out. She listened to Caroline's full story in one sitting without taking a note. Then she said, "You have a very strong position. Let me tell you exactly why." She enumerated. The 40% clause. The documented hotel charges on the marital account. The calendar entries. The pattern of behavior Owen had quietly confirmed. And then something Caroline had not known. There's a real estate development in Hilton Head, Harriet said. 3 condominiums. Purchased 18 months ago through a subsidiary company. Not on the joint accounts. 18 months ago, when Danielle began. He was building a parallel financial life, Caroline said. Yes, Harriet said. People do this when they intend to exit one situation and maintain another. The parallel financial structure usually precedes the formal announcement. She looked at Caroline over the reading glasses. He was planning to leave you. The words landed, not with devastation, with clarity. He had been planning to leave, but he had not done it before Alice. Because a Whitfield heir born in wedlock has different standing. Because he had been managing multiple considerations simultaneously. He had been hedging. She thought about the dinner, about Danielle in her chair. She thought, that was not sloppiness. That was pressure. He was applying pressure to see if she would shrink or retreat, or simply accept the new arrangement without forcing the confrontation. He had not expected Vivian. He had not expected her. I want to retain you, Caroline said. I assumed as much, Harriet said. I have a retainer agreement ready. She pulled it from the right drawer of the large desk. It was already prepared, which meant Owen had given Harriet more than context. He had given her a head start. Caroline signed it. Harriet looked at it, filed it, and said, now, the confrontation with your husband. Have you had it yet? Tonight, Caroline said. Good, Harriet said. Here is what I want you to do. Say what you know. Clearly, without anger if you can manage it. Let him respond. Listen carefully to what he volunteers. Then leave. She paused. Do not negotiate anything. Do not make agreements. That is my job. What am I listening for? What he admits, Harriet said, and what he doesn't. She drove home. She had 4 hours before Carol Ann left for Ruth Ann's. 4 hours to make the soup, set the table, and be a person who was not preparing to alter her entire life. She managed it. The soup was good. The table was set. Her mother ate with the appetite of someone who had earned their meal. Caroline ate with the focus of someone who understood that the body needs fuel regardless of what the mind is doing. At 7, Carol Ann packed a small overnight bag. She stood in the kitchen doorway. You call me, she said. The minute you're done. I will, Caroline said. And Caroline, her mother held her gaze. You are not the woman who stood in that doorway. You haven't been her since the moment Vivian said, get up. Remember that. She left. Caroline washed the soup bowls. She dried them. She stood in the kitchen listening to the house settle. I'm not crazy, she thought. I know exactly what happened. I know exactly what I found. I know exactly what I'm going to say. She waited. She waited until 9. Preston was in the study. She had never been inside. She could hear the murmur of a phone call through the closed door. She sat in the living room and looked at the garden through the tall windows. She let herself feel everything she was feeling. Because once she said the true thing out loud, the room would change. She knew this. She had watched her mother do it when Caroline was 9 years old, standing in the kitchen doorway in Macon. Carol Ann had looked at Caroline's father and said, I know who you are, and I know you need to leave. And her father had not spoken for a full minute, and the room had changed. It had eventually changed into something better. But the first change was loss. She breathed. She thought about Alice, who would arrive in 4 weeks, who would be born into whatever life existed on the other side of tonight. She got up. She knocked on the study door. One moment, Preston called. She waited. He opened the door. Shirt sleeves. He looked tired, also very handsome, which was a fact she registered without softening. Caroline, is everything all right? I'd like to talk, she said. Can we sit? Something moved across his face, then settled into composure. Of course, he said. They went to the sitting room. She took one chair. He took the one across. Neutral territory. I went to see Owen Grayson yesterday morning, she said. Silence. I know about the Palmetto house, she said. I know about Danielle. I know the prenuptial agreement has an infidelity clause. I know the Hilton Head properties. I know the marital asset valuation. She said it all, clean and direct, without anger. The anger was present. She could feel it. But it was not leading, something clearer was leading. Preston was very still. Caroline, he started. I'm not asking for explanations yet, she said. I want to know one honest thing. Were you ever going to tell me? Or was the plan to keep going? Keep both lives. Until something forced the issue. He looked at his hands. The looking at his hands was her answer. She's pregnant, he said. Very quietly, almost inaudibly. The room changed. She felt it. The walls adjusting to the new information. The air rearranging itself around a new fact. Danielle Foster was pregnant. She sat with that for 3 seconds. 1. The Palmetto house. 2. Danielle in the chair at dinner. 3. Preston looking at his hands. How far along, Caroline said. 11 weeks. So, Danielle had gotten pregnant while Caroline was 5 months along with Alice. While Caroline was growing their daughter. While she was organizing dinners and ordering orchids and performing Caroline Whitfield with complete dedication, Preston had been building a second family. Not just an affair. A family. She was not crying she had expected to cry. She was not. She realized past crying about this particular thing. She had done her crying on the bathroom floor 2 nights ago. What she felt now was something that had been forming for 2 days. Something that had clarified with each piece of information. She felt herself, very clearly as herself. Not as Preston's wife. Not as a Whitfield. Not as the woman in the doorway. As Caroline Merritt, who had grown up in Macon with a pecan pie mother, and a grandmother who kept buttons on the windowsill and who had spent 3 years making herself smaller and was done. She stood. I'm going to say this once, she said, and I want you to hear it. He looked up at her. I am not angry yet, she said. Anger is coming. But right now what I feel is specific. I feel like I spent 3 years disappearing, one small piece at a time, and I allowed it. Because I loved you and I believed that love meant making room for you, shrinking for you. I thought that was what devotion looked like. She paused. I was wrong about that. He opened his mouth. I'm not finished, she said, quietly, but with the quality of something finished. The way Vivian had been quiet, he closed his mouth. Alice is going to be born into whatever I build for her, she said, and I am going to build something real, something that doesn't require me to be invisible, and you are going to support that, financially and legally and completely, because the prenuptial agreement says you will, because she is your daughter. And because the alternative is a documented public legal process I am fully prepared to pursue. She picked up her phone from the coffee table. I'm going to Ruth Ann's tonight, she said. Harriet Foss will be in contact. She walked toward the door. Caroline. His voice was different. Something stripped out of it. She stopped, but she did not turn around. I'm sorry, he said. She stood there. She let herself feel whether she believed it. She believed he meant it. She also knew it was not enough to fix anything. I know, she said. She went upstairs. She packed efficiently her grandmother's watch, the notebook from the desk drawer, 3 books, the things that were hers before they were both of theirs. She looked around the bedroom. She thought about Vivian's cottage, the books with cracked spines, the garden that breathed. She had never had a room that breathed. She wanted one. She went downstairs. She did not go back into the sitting room. She drove to Ruth Ann's, and in the car, alone on the dark road between the Whitfield estate and the city, she cried. She cried for the 3 years, for the orchids, for the version of Preston she had loved before she understood he had been someone else all along. She cried for Alice, who would come into the world in a complicated situation she had not asked for. She cried until she couldn't anymore. Then she dried her face. She pulled onto Ruth Ann Street. She sat in the car for 1 minute, not the paralyzed sitting of 2 nights ago. This was different. This was arrival. This was taking a breath before stepping into something new. She got out of the car. Ruth Ann's guest room had a blue quilt and a window that faced east. Caroline lay on the bed with the quilt folded at her feet and looked at the ceiling. Her phone had 8 messages, 2 from Preston, 1 from Margaret, 1 from Vivian, 3 from numbers she didn't recognize, 1 from Owen. She read Vivian's first. It said, well done, rest now. She read Owen's. It said, Harriet called. You are in excellent hands. She put the phone face down. She lay in the blue quilt room and breathed. The baby moved, a slow roll, a push against her ribs. Hey, Caroline said softly, it's just us. She put both hands on her belly. I'm going to tell you about this week, she said quietly to Alice, when you're older. I'm going to tell you about the dinner and the chair and about Grandma Vivian standing up in a room of 31 people. I'm going to tell you about Grandma Carol Ann coming with a pecan pie and about Owen Grayson's yellow legal pad and Harriet Fossey's reading glasses. The baby pushed back against her hand. And I'm going to tell you that I was scared, Caroline said. I want to be honest about that. I was very scared. She looked at the ceiling. Your father is not a bad man, she said. He is a man who stopped trying to be a good one. There is a difference. What that means for you will be complicated, and you will form your own opinions when you're old enough. But I will never keep you from knowing him. That is not who I am. She closed her eyes. She thought about who she had been before Preston. 26 years old, studying art history at SCAD because she wanted to understand why humans make beautiful things, why the desire to create, to mark existence with meaning, is the most consistent thing about human beings across all of recorded time. She had been someone interested in her own thoughts. She had put that person down, not all at once. Gradually, the way you set something heavy on a shelf because you need your hands free and then forget to pick it up again. The hardest part isn't what he did, she thought again. The hardest part is what I did to myself. The permissions I gave, the small surrenders. That's the part I have to forgive myself for. She heard Ruth Ann in the kitchen, the sound of the kettle. She got up, walked to the kitchen, sat at the table. Ruth Ann looked at her, long and careful. How are you, she said. I feel like myself, Caroline said, for the first time in a long time. It's a very strange feeling. Strange good or strange bad? Both. She wrapped her hands around the mug Ruth Ann set in front of her. He told me about Danielle. Ruth Ann was still. She's pregnant, Caroline said. 11 weeks. Oh, Caroline. I know. They were quiet. Alice is going to have a sibling she didn't ask for, Caroline said. Alice is going to have a mother who is unshakable, Ruth Ann said. Caroline looked at her. You've been shaken, Ruth Ann said. That's different from breaking. Shaken means you moved. Unshakable means you didn't fall. They sat in the kitchen for an hour, talking and not talking. The particular language of people who have known each other long enough that silence carries content. At 1 in the morning, Caroline went back to the blue quilt room. She slept. For the first time in 4 days, she actually slept. She woke to morning light through the east window, gold and unhurried. The light asked nothing and gave everything. She lay in it for a moment. She thought about her grandmother's tapestry research, the thread she'd been following before she met Preston, the women in medieval tapestries who had stitched their own names into the fabric, hidden in the figures, requiring patience to find, but permanent, because they had decided to persist. They had been invisible by circumstance. They had refused to be invisible by intent. She got up. She took a shower. She borrowed clothes from Ruth Ann, who was a similar size and had better casual options than Caroline had packed. She went to the kitchen and made breakfast for both of them. She called Harriet at 9. We have our first formal meeting on Monday, Harriet said. Between now and then, I need you to write down everything you remember about the household finances, every account, every property you know about, every purchase that seemed unusual. Don't try to be a lawyer. Just be honest and thorough. I already have notes, Caroline said. A pause. Good, Harriet said. You've been paying attention. More than anyone realized, Caroline said. She called her doctor next, Dr. Patricia Noel, who had a voice like someone who has seen everything and maintained respect for all of it. Come in today, Dr. Noel said. I want to see how you're doing. You're at 36 weeks. We should check everything. She drove herself. And in the examination room, in the quiet clinical light, Dr. Noel checked everything and said, Baby looks perfect. You look tired but healthy. And you look like someone who made a hard decision. I did, Caroline said. How do you feel about it? Caroline thought about it. Like myself, she said. For the first time in a long time, Dr. Noel nodded. Then you made the right one. She drove back to Ruth Ann's through the Savannah streets. The river was bright. The bridges were sharp against the sky. She thought, I have been doing everything alone for a long time. I just convinced myself I wasn't. I just called it partnership. And then underneath that, I can do this. I have been doing hard things. I just wasn't doing them for myself. I'm doing them for myself now. 6 days after she left, Vivian called. Come for coffee, she said. This morning. Just us. Caroline drove to the cottage. Rosa opened the door. She would deal with changing Rosa's name in her own mind to something more neutral. The woman had been kind to her for 3 years regardless, and the cottage smelled of coffee and the garden and old books. Vivian sat in her usual chair. She looked exactly as she always looked, which was to say entirely herself, unhurried and deliberate and present in the way of people who have lived long enough to stop wasting time. Rosa brought coffee and left. "How are you sleeping?" Vivian asked. "Better," Caroline said. "The baby?" "4 weeks. Maybe less." Vivian nodded. "I had Preston 2 weeks early. He arrived before anyone was ready." She looked out the window at the garden. "He has as always arrived before anyone was ready." Caroline didn't know what to say to that. "I spoke to Harriet Fossey," Vivian said. "She mentioned you called," Caroline said. "She is the best family law attorney in the state," Vivian said. "I know this because I retained her 15 years ago when I was restructuring my personal estate, which is separate from Whitfield family assets, which is relevant information." She looked at Caroline. "My personal estate is structured differently than Preston believes." Caroline waited. "I have a trust," Vivian said. "It has existed for 22 years. It was established to protect certain assets from certain family decisions I could not endorse." She folded her hands. "Alice Whitfield is named as a primary beneficiary of that trust. She was added when you became pregnant. I want you to know that." Caroline absorbed this. "Mrs. Vivian, I am not doing this for sentiment," the old woman said. "I am doing this because the seat at his left is his wife's, and the name his wife carries is his wife's, and the child, born of that marriage, carries the full weight of that name and everything it should rightfully provide." She picked up her coffee cup. "It is structural. Does Preston know?" "Preston knows what I choose to tell him," Vivian said, "which is frequently less than he assumes." She almost smiled. "He has always underestimated how much I pay attention." Caroline thought, "We have that in common." "I want to show you something," Vivian said. She stood slowly and moved to the bookshelf near the window. She pulled down a small leather case. She opened it and set it on the coffee table. The pearl brooch. "This was my mother's," Vivian said, "and her mother's before that. I told you when you first came to this family that it would be yours when you earned it." She looked at the brooch. "You've earned it." "The divorce isn't finalized," Caroline said. "The brooch is not conditional on your marriage," Vivian said. "It is conditional on your character." Caroline looked at the brooch. She thought about the dinner, the chair, the voice that had cut through a room. She thought about all the things this woman had seen and not said, and finally, when it mattered most, said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Why did you wait?" Caroline asked. "You knew for months. Why the dinner? Why that night?" Vivian was quiet for a moment. "Because Preston needed to see what it looked like," she said. "What he was doing, reflected in a room full of people who would remember it." She looked at the brooch. "Some lessons cannot be private." Caroline picked up the brooch. Pearl was old and warm. It had the weight of something with a history. "I'm going to finish my research," Caroline said. It came out suddenly. She hadn't planned to say it. "I know," Vivian said. "The essays. The tapestries. The women who hid their names in permanent things." "I read your first essay," Vivian said, "the one you sent to the literary journal." Caroline looked up. "Ruth Ann told you?" "Ruth Ann is concerned you undersell yourself. She called to ask if I would read it and offer an opinion." I offered an opinion. Vivian looked at her steadily. "The Whitfield Foundation funds women's historical research. You would be an appropriate applicant if you chose to complete the work." Caroline sat with this, the foundation that bore the name she was leaving, the work she had set down when she picked up someone else's life. "I'll think about it," she said. "Think quickly," Vivian said. "The application window is in 6 weeks." Alice arrived at 38 weeks on a Tuesday morning in a rush and a sound that Caroline had been told to prepare for and was entirely unprepared for regardless. She was red and outraged and immediately, completely herself. Carol Ann was in the room. Ruth Ann was in the waiting area. Dr. Noel placed Alice on Caroline's chest with the care of someone who understands the weight of what they are handing over. Caroline looked at her daughter. She thought about the hidden names in the tapestries, the women who persisted, who marked their existence into things that outlasted them. She thought about standing in the doorway at the dinner, the moment before Vivian's voice, the last moment she was invisible. "Alice," she said. Alice curled her fist around Caroline's finger with the immediate authority of someone who has never doubted where she belongs. "She belongs here," Caroline thought. "And so do I." Vivian came to the hospital that afternoon. She looked at Alice for a long time without speaking. "She has the Whitfield forehead," she said finally. "God help her," Caroline said. Vivian looked up, something in her face that was undefended and very old. She handed Caroline the small wrap package she'd brought, the pearl brooch. "I know I gave it to you already," Vivian said, "but I wanted to give it to you again." In front of her. She looked at Alice. "So she knows it is hers eventually." Caroline held it. She thought, 3 years ago this woman told me this brooch would be mine when I earned it. I thought she meant by managing the dinners and the orchids and the appearances. I thought she was grading me on performance. She was grading me on something else entirely. On whether I would, when it mattered, stand up for myself. The house on Jones Street had a walled garden. That was the first thing Caroline noticed when the realtor opened the front door. The garden, visible at the end of the narrow hallway, enclosed by old brick walls with a fig tree growing against the south side and space for flowers along the borders. A garden that breathed. She made an offer that afternoon. In the following months, she learned what it meant to furnish a home entirely according to her own instincts. Not client relations, not Whitfield family decorum, not the muted good taste of a woman managing other people's impressions. Her own instincts. She put books in every room. Real books, the kind she'd read and marked and returned to. She put her grandmother's watch in a small dish by the kitchen sink where she'd see it every morning. She planted geraniums in hanging baskets by the front door because her mother had taught her that you can love beautiful things even when things are hard. She did not buy white orchids for the first 6 months. Then one Tuesday she walked past a flower stall and they were there, in a bucket. Very simple. And she bought 3 stems and put them on the kitchen table and thought, they were mine before they were ours. The divorce proceedings were, as Harriet had predicted, clear in structure and lengthy in execution. Preston did not contest the infidelity clause. He contested the asset valuations. The Hilton Head properties became a particular negotiation. Harriet was very good. 5 months after Alice was born, they reached a settlement. Caroline heard the terms from Harriet in the office on Abercorn Street with Alice asleep in the carrier on her chest. The terms were fair, not generous. Fair, which was better than generous, because fair meant real. She had agreed to a custody arrangement that gave Preston access. She had thought about this very carefully. She had talked to Ruth Ann and her mother and Dr. Noel and Vivian, and finally, most usefully, she had talked to herself. Alice deserved to know her father. Alice also deserved to know her father clearly, without the distortion of her mother's resentment or her mother's protection. Alice would form her own opinions. Caroline would not form them for her. She had agreed to the arrangement. Danielle's son Thomas was born 2 months before Alice. Caroline had never spoken to Danielle and had no desire to. Not from anger. From the self-knowledge that some complications are not hers to manage. Danielle had also believed Preston's promises. That was its own story. Caroline had her own. She finished the first essay and submitted it to a literary journal in the month Alice turned 3 months old. She wrote it in the early mornings between 5 and 7, when Alice was still sleeping and the house was quiet, and the east light came through the study window in the particular way that feels like invitation. The journal accepted it. She wrote the second essay and a third. She applied to the Whitfield Foundation. She told no one she was doing this, not Ruth Ann, not her mother, not Vivian, who had suggested it and who had almost certainly quietly arranged for a favorable reception, but who had the grace to pretend otherwise. The foundation director was Sandra Everly. Sandra read Caroline's proposal in front of her, which was disconcerting and clearly a test. Can you sit in a room while someone evaluates your work? Caroline sat. She kept her breathing even. She thought about Alice, probably pulling herself towards standing at the sitters right now. She did that. She grabbed the edge of things and hauled herself upright. I taught her that, Caroline thought. Or she came with it. Probably both. Sandra looked up from the proposal. The women who hid their names in the tapestries, she said. You're arguing this was a deliberate archival strategy. Yes, Caroline said. Not just signature. Intention. They understood the tapestry would outlast them, and potentially outlast the social structures that made them invisible. So they marked themselves into permanence. And the parallel to contemporary women is that the instinct to persist is not new, Caroline said. It's just sometimes underground. Threaded through other people's work. Visible if you know what you're looking for. Sandra looked at the proposal again. 6 months of funded research, she said. Support for full monograph publication. Not just the essays. She looked up. Does that interest you? Yes, Caroline said. It came out simply. No qualifier. No, I think so. No, if that seems appropriate. Just yes. Sandra Everly nodded. Good. On the drive home, Caroline took the long way. Past the waterfront, past the River Street cobblestones where tourists moved in the afternoon light, over the bridge. The water below was deep and moving and beautiful, in the specific way of things that do not care whether you are watching but reward you when you do. She thought about 3 years ago. A gallery opening. A man buying a painting because he wanted to see what she was looking at. She had been visible then. She thought about the doorway at the dinner, the moment of standing, the moment of understanding what she had been allowing. She had been invisible then. She thought about Alice, who grabbed the edges of things and hauled herself towards standing. She thought about the women in the tapestries, hidden in plain sight, permanent because they decided to persist. She pulled onto Jones Street. her narrow brick house with the walled garden, her fig tree against the south wall, her geraniums by the front door hers. She sat in the car for a moment, not the paralyzed sitting from the beginning of all this, not the 11 minutes in the dark driveway of someone else's house, unable to go inside. This was the choosing kind of sitting, the kind where you take a breath before you go inside because inside is good and you want to arrive ready to receive it. Ruth Ann had asked her last week, was it worth it? All of it. She had thought about that honestly. The 3 years of shrinking, the dinner, the chair, the bathroom floor, the hotel charges and Owen's legal pad and Harriet's reading glasses. The night she'd told Preston and then driven to Ruth Ann's kitchen and sat with tea in the small warm light. The blue quilt room, Vivian's cottage with its books and its garden, Alice arriving in a rush and a noise, the pearl brooch, the house on Jones Street, the study and the essays and the morning light through the east window. The question isn't whether it was worth it, she'd said. The question is what I did with it. Ruth Ann had looked at her. That's a different answer than I expected, Ruth Ann said. I'm a different person than I was, Caroline said. She got out of the car. She walked to her front door. The geraniums were doing well. She had talked to them twice this week. Her mother would have found this entirely reasonable. She unlocked the door. Inside, it smelled of the soup she had started that morning. Long cooked, patient. The kind that makes the whole house smell like something is being built from the inside out. She hung up her keys on the hook by the door. Her hook. Exactly where she'd put it. She went to the study she had built for herself, the desk she'd chosen, the books in their honest disorder, the notebooks, the half-finished page from this morning's writing. She sat down. She picked up her pencil. She had once thought that starting over was the cost of leaving, the lost side of the ledger, the punishment for having believed the wrong thing. She understood now that starting over was not the cost. It was the discovery. The prison door had been unlocked all along. She had been her own warden. Not because she was foolish, not because she was weak, because she had loved someone and love had blurred the edges of self, and she had not noticed until she stood in a doorway 8 months pregnant, while 31 people had conversations around her and no one looked up. And then a voice had cut through the room. Get up, not to her, but for her. And she had walked to her chair. Her chair she had sat down, and from that moment, without quite knowing it, she had been walking in one direction. Toward this desk, this study, this house that breathed, this garden with the fig tree and the geraniums. Toward Alice, who grabbed the edges of things and pulled herself toward standing. Toward herself. Completely. Exactly. Herself. She wrote the first sentence of the new chapter, not the essay. Something bigger. The book she had been afraid to begin. She wrote it without hedging, without qualification, without the small interior apologies she had been adding to everything she made for 3 years. She wrote it as Caroline Merritt, who had grown up with a pecan pie mother and a button jar grandmother, who had studied why humans mark themselves into permanence, who had spent 3 years becoming invisible and 1 hard week deciding to be seen. Outside, the afternoon light moved through the tall study windows and fell across the desk in the specific way that light falls when it finds an open room and means to stay. She kept writing. She did not stop.